So I want to give a quick round of introductions to our friends today. So my name is Tim Fan. I am the Civic Engagement Manager for VietRISE. Um, we have Rashad. Would you like to say a few words, Rashad?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rashad Abdabar, and I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Civic Council.
Um, Logan, would you like to say something?
Hey folks, thanks for the opportunity to chat. I'm Logan Smith. I'm a policy analyst with Harbor Institute for Immigrant and Economic Justice.
And lastly, we have our Executive Director.
Hi, everyone. Looking forward to chatting with you all and the um, the presentation. So looking forward to any questions you all have. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all for being here. I'm gonna give a quick context to our agenda for this evening. I'm gonna start with a presentation and giving some context and details to redistricting, what Prop 50 is, why was this proposed in the first place, how the maps are drawn in the first place, the importance of congressional districts and their boundaries. And then we'll move into a more interactive presentation where I have some maps and slides to kind of show you how this is going to be impacting Orange County. And lastly, we'll have a presentation where our panelists, all three of us here, are just going to be taking some questions for myself. And then we'll open it up for Q&A where the audience can please answer questions, ask questions in the comments. The Q&A functions, we'll be watching the chat, doing our best to answer as much as we can and just share some community knowledge. And with that, we'll just go straight into our presentation. So give me a second. So I'm share my screen. All right. Hopefully y'all seeing this. All right. So Prop 50, let's just talk about it. Okay. So, so what's going on? So for us, we wanted to start with a description of what redistricting is, what normally happens in a more traditional time. Usually every 10 years after the census, a independent redistricting committee puts together congressional boundaries while considering the input in workshops across the state from community orgs like VietRISE, which we've done. Lots of feedback is given, workshops, hearings, maps are voted on by an independent and nonpartisan committee. This committee is filled with both Democrats and Republicans, and it's a committee that's meant to be as transparent as possible. There's several rounds of votings, several rounds of public hearing, public comments. Our organization at VietRISE, we've done a lot in the 2021 cycle to canvass our neighbors, talk to our residents, lead community workshops. And this is done all across the state in every district. And then the people who make these maps are trying their best to make decisions on how to keep communities together, which priorities to consider while redrawing their maps. And this happens after the census is taken. The census is done every 10 years, 2010, 2020, 2030. Every 10 years, there's a big census. And that's a separate cycle too, in which community groups are talking to communities, making sure that we're filling out responses. And when we see new population estimates come in, that's how we know how to adjust. So this is what normally happens, but this year has been extremely difficult and different. What's been happening is that in the context of Donald Trump's second administration, the Texas Republican Party, what they went and did with the explicit direction from Donald Trump, they were intentionally trying to gerrymander their congressional districts to support the Republican Party's chances of holding Congress in the upcoming 2026 midterms. Now, here's a quote from State Representative Carl Tepper from Texas, where he's very nakedly, blatantly honest about the intention of this. Uh, He was, as you can tell, he's saying we're not allowed to draw by race, but we are allowed to be as partisan as possible, and that's what we're doing. We're not going to try and fool you. We're not trying to lie to you. These are partisan maps. And Donald Trump, saw the writing on the wall. He wanted to safeguard his Republican Party's chances of holding Congress. And if he holds Congress, he has a stronger chance of enacting a legislative and policy agenda, without needing any type of accountability from anyone else. What Texas is doing is also done without voter approval. They did this by voting without, input from community groups. There were no votes, no citizen input at all. I wanted to show you a few maps of what before and after what's going on in Houston. This is an example of some of the congressional maps being gerrymandered very deliberately. I believe in District 9 of downtown Houston, this is a predominantly African American district that's been carved into a new congressional 18 district that shares a much more conservative base. And so this pattern is replicated all across the state to kind of pack minority districts into smaller districts, spread them out so that their voting power is diluted. And the net outcome of what Texas has done is essentially guarantee that the Texas Republican majority will likely increase their vote share to 5 votes in next year's elections. This has led to a lot of frustration from congressional Democrats in Texas, from voting rights advocates in Texas and across the country, because they saw this as a kind of the first shot in a battle, a redistricting battle. So in response, I wanted to show you a current map of the congressional majorities right now. So why does this matter? Right now, Republicans control Congress. We know that they obviously are controlling the White House, and with the ability to kind of ram through Donald Trump's legislative agenda, it's very concerning. And the Democratic Party, they're currently behind on a few votes. We have 3 vacancies, but more or less, it's right there for in the midterm elections for the Democrats to take over if they obviously campaign effectively. Historically, every midterm election after a presidential election tends to have a major shift back to the other party. And so that's kind of what, and especially when you consider Donald Trump's polling, he's been doing very poorly with a lot of voters, especially independent voters. Uh, in response, Gavin Newsom and the California state legislature decided they weren't going to take this lying down. What started as a rumor on Twitter, what started as a little back and forth, started coalescing and snowballing into a very active legislative proposal. And in late August, 3 bills were signed to essentially redistrict the maps, suspend the Independent Citizen Redistricting Commission, and establish November 4th, this upcoming Tuesday, as a special election to create a pathway for citizens of California to make their input on whether or not this is something that California wants to do. The big difference, of course, between California and Texas is that whereas the Texas state legislature did this on their own accord, California still had to ask for voter approval. Because a constitutional amendment had created an independent redistricting committee, it would take an additional amendment in a way to reverse that. And so that's kind of the context of what is happening. I want to show you a little bit more about the process of how these maps are drawn. So this is Paul Mitchell. He is the vice president of PDI, which is a political data Inc. They are a mapping software used by advocacy groups, by campaigns to help people target their voters. And so Paul Mitchell and his consultancy group was commissioned by the Democratic Party, by Gavin Newsom, to redraw their maps. And they did this, in a partisan way, of course, trying to figure out how to squeeze more Democratic votes out of, Republican seats. However, according to what they publicly have shared, they tried their best to keep communities together. They tried their best to follow the Voting Rights Act. They did a lot to listen to community feedback from the 2021 cycle and incorporate that testimony back into the maps that they are drawing today. And so after 2 weeks or how long it took for Paul Mitchell and his consultants to kind of sit in these rooms and draw out the maps, those maps were approved by the California Democrats in the state legislature, and those are the maps we are about to see today. To speak honestly about what the proposition would do if this passes. So essentially, we will be withdrawing California districts to moving from the independent redistricting committee back to this temporary measure. In the messaging, California has said, they said that this is a temporary measure, and after 2030 census, during the 2031 cycle, they would go back to the Independent Citizen Redistricting Commission. I assume that this is done because they're hoping to do better in the 2028 presidential election. Who knows what the politics will be like then? And obviously, if Prop 50 passes, this would give the Democrats a very strong advantage into carving out districts that are more favorable to incumbents who are in tough swing districts, frontline districts, and this would hopefully give them an edge to capturing the majority of Congress in next year's midterm elections. Obviously, if Prop 50 fails, the status quo change. We're basically where we are today. We would still keep our concurrent congressional districts. We would still be using the Independent Redistricting Commission. And obviously, the Republicans would have an advantage in keeping control of Congress in the upcoming midterm elections. This is very important because other states are now starting to move and respond to what California is doing. North Carolina, Louisiana, I believe Kansas, a lot of other states are being pressured by the Republican leaders to kind of tit for tat, kind of do the same thing. So if we are seeing the outbreak of a gerrymandering war, a redistricting war, a broader attack on the Voter Rights Act, we're seeing the Supreme Court obviously rule on this. This is going to give a lot of uncertainty into how California and the country is going to go when it comes to Congress. Okay, so at this point, I want to show you the maps myself. I did a lot of work to um, do my own GIS mapping and do my best to visualize some of these maps so that you can have an idea of what it's going to look like. So let me give me a second. I'm going to share some maps. Okay. All right. So hopefully you all see this. This is a map that I've done for Orange County. And so here we have the current congressional maps for, let's pick on 80, CD 45. This is the Little Saigon district. This is Anaheim's CD 46, governed by Lou Correa, and CD 47, which is the Irvine corridor. So these are the three priority districts most relevant to our community right now. I also have this little cool graph to show the Arabic speaking community. Ignore the legend; it's not working correctly as much as I wanted to. Okay, so that's on the left side. Okay, so that's what our current maps are like. And also, if you want to see our Democrat votes, so the more green something is, the stronger it voted for the congressional Democrat in that specific precinct. So if I scroll really closely down to Westminster, Garden Grove, this is where the VietRISE office is. We are in a very contested congressional district. Santa Ana, Anaheim, obviously much more green, closer to Anaheim Hills, and Yorba Linda, much more difficult territory, more conservative leaning. Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, you're seeing similar things as well. Okay, so let me, now on the right side, these are what the new maps will look like. So let's start with CA 45 because this is something we're looking at very closely in Garden Grove. So this is obviously the old district. And if I scroll it over, this is what the new district is going to look like. So if I add on the congressional map here, you can see that congressional district 45 is losing kind of the more conservative part of North Orange County, where Brea and Yorba Linda, this part of the district in the North OC area that Derek Tran is also representing, it's being shaved off, given to the next district over in, I think, CA 40, 49. It's like the LA San Bernardino district on the right side. Derek Tran is also gaining a large chunk of voters in the Cerritos, Norwalk, Artesia area. And this obviously has a strong South Asian and Asian demographic, a lot of new voters, LA voters, congressional. I don't have the congressional vote for LA right here, but this is going to be obviously much more supportive of Democrats. This is currently, I believe, Linda Sanchez's district, or I think CA 37, correct. This area is currently CA 37. And so Derek Tran's also gaining. He's also shaving off Los Alamitos, Rossmore, and this area is a lot more Republican, conservative. That's been chopped off and given to Robert Garcia's district in Long Beach. I don't have the LA precincts here, but essentially what's happening with Long Beach is that Long Beach and Huntington Beach are going to be sharing a congressional district. I'm sure that'll be very fun for um, the MAGA friends there. And so that's kind of we see this pattern across the state. And so looking at uh, Lou Correa's district, which is um, CA 46. So this is what CA 46 will look like with the new districts. So, so obviously, right now, this is what congressional district 46 looks like, mostly Anaheim, most of Santa Ana. He's once that district is passed, he's going to give that over. He's going to lose a little chunk. He's going to lose a little chunk down here too. He's going to give that over to Derek Tran. So the new district, little bit of his Santa Ana voters here are going to be given to Derek Tran right here, very close to yeah, West Santa Ana. And this is very interesting for us at VietRISE because we have a very strong Vietnamese population down here. This is a map of Vietnamese density of our the darker something is, the more Vietnamese residents we have here. And we know that West Santa Ana also has a lot of Vietnamese voters. They are going to be given to Derek Tran. Not all of them, but more than what he had. So again, this is what Derek Tran has right now. He's going to get a lot more. Not all of it. We would prefer to see the whole river given, right? This is the 5 freeway, the 5 Santa Ana River, I believe, right? That's a natural geography boundary, but he's going to keep a little chunk for Lou right there. So let's see. Lou is also getting, yeah, Lou Correa is also losing parts of Orange, right? This is like Orange area. That's right. Oh no, he's gaining that area. This is I think, more conservative part of the district as well. Uh, yeah, so Lou's going to be gaining some conservative voters. We're going to talk a little bit more about the implications for what this may mean in terms of governance, but you're going to see this pattern across the state where safe seat Democrats who are in blue districts like Anaheim, Santa Ana, kind of carved out a little pieces of their territory to purple seats, more vulnerable districts. Quickly want to take a look at Irvine. I know we have a lot of people from Irvine here today, probably. So this is currently governed by Dave Min. He's been in office for 1 term. He was a state senator before that. So this is what the Irvine seat looks like, right? Just so you can see it. Irvine is currently with Huntington Beach, with Newport Beach. But once we see the new maps come in, he's basically losing that chunk. He's losing that chunk of Huntington Beach. So Dave Min will not have to deal with most of Huntington Beach and Costa Mesa, but he will be gaining newer voters in South Orange County, Laguna Niguel, San Juan Capistrano, parts of Mission Viejo, parts of Lake Forest. These will be new voters for him. I definitely would love to see how this affects the Arabic speaking population. Now, I'm sure Rashad will talk more about this at length. In terms of my data, I use Arabic language as a proxy for Arabic residents. I also understand that this is not a perfect measure. These are the limitations of census and federal data. We obviously have a lot of work to go in terms of more nuanced data from our government. But from the census data I had, and that's what I had to go on. So yeah, so this is what we're seeing with the Irvine corridor. We're seeing obviously a different district. For 47 is going to be sharing more voters with South Orange County. Very curious to know how that's going to affect the governance and our campaigns down there. So yeah, so those are some of the questions. Yeah. Oh, I see a question from yes. In terms of the air condensation, I got this data from the American Census Survey of the U.S. Census. This is updated almost every year. It's not perfect data. This is the ACS census data. We'll be sharing this slide afterwards, so you can play around with it yourselves. Um, Personally, I believe people should always be asking questions about where to get data, how to use it. So we want to make sure that these tools are available for people just to quickly understand how to look at this stuff. See a question from Orange and Tustin. Would Orange and Tustin be with the new map? Let's check. Okay, so Orange and Tustin kind of split actually. I'm looking at it right now. So parts of Tustin and Orange. Yeah, let's see how the old map for 46, 47. Um, I mean, it was already bisecting parts of Orange where the Chapman University is right here, and Tufton was not part of CA 46. Um, but yeah, we'll see with the new map. Yeah, they're going to be consolidated a little bit more, but still a little not too close. I would say they're still kind of different. Um, yeah, hope that answers your question. Okay. Yeah, but once you get the access to the tool, happy to, we encourage you to play around with this stuff. It's really cool to play around and kind of learn new things about your district, learn new things about your community. For me personally, I love kind of seeing how the Democrat congressional vote. I don't necessarily believe that a congressional vote in one election is the end all be all to like how blue or red one district is. Voting patterns change all the time. A congressional vote will be different than a presidential vote. Because sometimes people vote for a president one way and Congress a different way. We understand that that's not a perfect metric in itself. Um, I certain that when Paul Mitchell and his consultants drew up these maps, they were also considering other factors such as voter registration to statistics. They were looking at the likelihood of people to be Democrat. I'm sure they had internal metrics that they're not necessarily revealing, but the idea that they weren't thinking about this, I'm sure that they were thinking about stuff like that. And yes, to answer your question to the last, this Gavin Newsom has said publicly this is a fight fire with fire type of scenario. Across the board, Democrats have been taking a beating this past year, and in terms of legislative and campaign spaces, a lot of people have been calling for the Democrats to be acting more decisively, more boldly, and to Gavin Newsom and a lot of the congressional Democrats, they see this as that way into fighting Trump. You'll see this maybe in the ads, the mails, the digital TV ads, the YouTube ads. A lot of people have been trying to make this about an anti-Trump thing, trying to make Trump's live, Trump is against this, let's be against Trump. California is against Trump. That's a lot of the messaging. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the panel breakout. I think that's a really important thing to talk about in terms of how the surrogates for against the campaign and for the campaign are talking about this issue. But for now, this is kind of like where I think people should be like thinking about in terms of how do we see the new maps. I also understand, the maps are they're not very easily accessible online. You can't really see where your districts line up. Of course, this is only congressional, doesn't affect our city, our municipal boundaries, it doesn't affect our state legislative boundaries, the county districts, those things are obviously all still intact. Most people are going to have to learn new districts, especially if they are involved in organizing and campaign work. We think this is
And
obviously going,
there's a
yeah.
there's a couple more questions. So someone
Oh,
asked where would Orange and Tustin be, which you answered.
yes.
Rima asked, are Via Park,
Oh,
Orange, and Laguna Woods, are they going to be in Dave Min's district?
let's double check. So Via Park is up north, I believe. I think Via Park is up here. No, yeah, I think uh, yeah, he's not. I don't think Via Park was part of Dave Min's map to begin with. I believe um, that was. Oh, it's actually not out here. Yeah, it was not part of his map to begin with. And Laguna Woods and Orange. Let's see, Laguna Woods is down here, I believe. No, yeah, I think. I'm not sure where Laguna Woods is. Um, and yeah, Orange. Yeah, he's definitely getting a lot more of Orange, but not all of it. He's got a little tiny chunk of Orange, but not all of it. I believe that's mostly going to still be um, Lou Correa's new map. So this will.
And in
Yeah,
terms, D asked what district Tustin will be in.
oh, thank you. Now Tustin uh, was Tustin's carved out going to be split between 47, 46. So if you're on this side of Tustin, I believe you're in Dave Min's district. Um, I don't know what the exact border for Tustin is. So depending on your cross streets, yeah. Oh, Via Park is now Young Kim's district. Yeah, thanks for that. And, we didn't get to talk about Young Kim's district. Let me show. Yeah, 40 is changing quite a bit too. So this is currently um 40. This is Young Kim's district. Uh, so this part, Chino, it's got parts of San Bernardino, I believe now, right? That's like the old map. Um, but with the new map, it's going to even stretch further into closer to uh, like Elsinore, Riverside, Marietta. Very different. Yeah. Um, I don't have the Riverside and Inland Empire maps loaded. That would be more memory intensive than my app is allowing. Um, but yeah, I know that my Congress member, Linda Sanchez, if I think that district's going to have a lot of the North County area when it comes to yeah, this area. But yeah, a lot of new maps, a lot of changing. Oh yeah, Laguna Woods is south of the freeway by 5, and thanks for that context. I'm not down south of Orange County that that often to know that, but thank you for that context. Yeah. Yeah. So any other questions? Obviously, really want to make sure that you all get access to snaps so that we can, look at it together. But I think this is a great chance for you all to kind of think critically about um, why this matters. Oh, I see a raised hand. Do you want to ask your question in the chat? Okay. I think hopefully you answered your question already. Okay, so obviously these maps, if the property passes, we'll have new maps. That's going to change a lot of our governing priorities. How I want to set up our panel discussion is kind of thinking critically about what our congressional representatives, where are they right now on a lot of our community issues. This past year, we've seen so much in terms of immigration, foreign policy. We've seen so much being done to roll back civil liberties. These are things that are impacting both the Arab and Vietnamese community very deeply. And our congressional members have a lot to answer for in terms of how they are responding to these things. Would Prop 50 change the equation in any direction? And this is the kind of the large question I want our panelists to kind of go into. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen and let our panelists a chance to talk. And so I'm going to start with the first question for our panelists today. Thank you all for being here. And I just want to ask quickly, so Prop 50 stated goal is to alter the terrain of our congressional maps, and so that they would have an easier chance of taking Congress next year. Now, if Donald Trump is forced to go to Congress and with a newly elected Democratic majority, um, how do you think the Democrats should govern? And Rashad, we'll start with you.
Good question. Uh, I think the first thing Democrats should do is, in an ideal world, is to listen to their constituents, understand the concerns, and deliver. It should be as basic as that. It should be as simple as that. But we're living in strange times, and I think Democrats must prioritize protecting institutions and civil society that Trump is currently attacking. Our legal system, our constitution are under attack. Everything must be done to stop him from trying to win another term. I think he has goals of winning another term, so that should be priority. Everything must be done to stop the Trump regime from staying beyond the second term that he's serving right now.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I think within Orange County, our Democratic leaders from the 45th, 46th, and 47th district. They have they need to do more to represent the constituents that they are elected to represent. I want to talk more about this later, but I'll
Yeah,
stop here and give an opportunity for the
yeah.
other
And
panelists
I
to
encourage
address.
the panelists to talk to each other. Just, Tracy, would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer in a way that is maybe more, um, hopefully being real about the current situation we're in with the leadership that we have in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So something that VietRISE cares a lot about, of course, and is one of the priorities is immigration. And we've seen over the last 10 plus years, whenever there was a Democratic majority in Congress and in the executive office, they have not done anything to move the needle on any major issue that working class people are fighting for. I started organizing an immigrant rights movement in around 2017, 2018. It was a second iteration of, or one of the many iterations of the DREAM Act, which was at the time going to provide a pathway to citizenship for many undocumented community members. And um, they even shut down the government. Nothing happened. When, Obama was in office, he was a Democrat, he held the congressional majority, did nothing for immigration until he was forced to do something using an executive order, which we now know as DACA. So how should they govern? Um, when it comes to governance, your actions outweigh your words tenfold. And we are constantly seeing Democrats say things that they think will make us kind of shut up and just sit back and be okay with saying the right things. And then they never do anything. Seriously. So I think we're in a time where a lot of the way that our system has been built is unraveling. Many parts of it does not work clearly. Um, we criticize other countries for having one party, really, but now we only have two parties to choose from that are essentially have the same values. When Democrats hold the majority, they're still voting, in favor of whatever the Republican Party wants them to do. And we saw that with immigration.
Mhm.
We even saw that with Roe v. Wade. So um, it's time for them to just be honest. You're either with the
Mhm.
working class people, you're with immigrant communities, or you're not. And that's how they should govern from an honest place.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tracy. Logan, I want to pass this to you. Your initial thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I think that's great framing of the urgency of the moment from Tracy and from Rashad. For me, I'm looking for if they take power, right, and recognizing that we're probably not going to get the Senate back because the competitive Senate races, it's not looking like there's going to be enough of them for that to happen. But we could retake, or Democrats could retake the House. Um, Democrats could retake the House. And so I'm looking at kind of this roadmap where I want to see the party moving to establish democracy guardrails, right? To address exactly what we're talking about when we say Trump going for a third term. That means national standards on redistricting so that we don't end up in this situation again, where we're playing, redistricting Tetris and dominoes around the country with red states and blue states going at it. Um, and we don't get whipsawed by something like this. We're talking about codifying at a federal level to the extent that you're constitutionally able the right to early voting or voting by mail and to vote without harassment by federal agents, right? Which is something we're now hearing. There will be federal agents potentially deployed to
Mm,
polling places in LA. We want to see them using oversight committees and their power in Congress and their power of appropriation to curb the abuses that we're seeing with DHS and DOJ, right? So even if the guide star of defunding ICE or ending mass detention may not be fully achievable in a divided federal government, there are victories, that can be the guide star, and there are victories that they can try to score along the way, like tying DOJ funding limits to reducing mass detention numbers or various due process safeguards. But it has to be a holistic effort too. So we want to see fast and popular wins, right? Things that will be hard for the Republicans to say no to, like capping prescription drug costs, expanding income tax credits, for the lowest income voters in the country and families in the country. Um, and specifically target these at the frontline districts created under these new maps. That's
yeah,
kind of a vital element of this. There's 100 other policies that we can see them push for, but at the end of the day, it has to address the urgency of the moment and the material conditions that folks are dealing with. So
mm,
we need to see those policy solutions directly shifting the needle in those areas in a way they
yeah,
historically have not.
yeah. No, thank you for that, Logan. And obviously, in the last year, we've seen such an uprise in protests and organizing work and activism, calling for a lot of what we've discussed. I want to use this to transition to our next question, specifically looking at our current congressional representatives in Orange County. Um, each of you have done a lot of work to hold our Congress members accountable. Dave Min, Derek Tran, Lou Correa, these are all Congress members in Orange County, some new, some old, but they still need to be held accountable on the issues that are closest to us. I want to get your take on where are they currently on in terms of foreign policy, civil liberties, and immigration. I think these are the things that you know, we're most involved with. And I want to hear from Rashad first. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Um, I want to start off by addressing the top issues that Arab Americans care about. We just did a poll. It hasn't been published yet. It's hot off the press. Um, so y'all are getting a sneak peek of that. According to a poll that we did, it's a statewide poll for Arab American voters. The top issues for Arab Americans are jobs and the economy and Gaza. Also, inflation, taxes, civil liberties. So it all revolves around Gaza and what happened because the civil rights abuses here in our local communities because of people's activism and the economy. So while economic issues are important for everyone, Gaza remains a top priority for this community, and that includes folks in the districts we're addressing. And it reflects deep frustration with U.S. policy during this genocide and the erosion of civil liberties, civil rights, free speech rights for those who have been advocating for Palestine. At the same time, we've seen national opinion have shifted. A growing majority of Americans, including Democrats and independents and many Republicans, now believe that Israel's actions in Gaza have gone too far, and voters oppose sending additional U.S. military aid to Israel. More than 60% of Americans oppose U.S. Financing of the genocide, and the number of those who support it are around 32%. Now, it's a troubling pattern. Despite growing, there's a troubling pattern despite growing public support for Palestinian human rights. These members are failing to reflect their constituents' demands. And I want to break it down in each district. Representative Derek Tran in the 45th district, uh, generally he listens more. On the House floor in July of 2025, Derek Tran condemned the killing of Palestinian civilians waiting for humanitarian aid and urged Trump to take action. He called for an investigation into the killing of a U.S. citizen in the West Bank, but he has not co-sponsored HR 3565, which is known as the Block the Bombs Bill, to limit U.S. weapons transfers to Israel. So uh, his so there's a limited support from Trans on this issue and concern for Palestinian civilians, but he's not doing enough. Um, uh, and he hasn't yet backed any legislation to restrict U.S. military aid to Israel. And
Mm.
I want to give credit to the activists and the community members who have been talking to him since before he was elected.
Mhm. Can
Um,
can you share more
mm.
about how Dave Min has been governing on Gaza? I would love to hear more context on that.
Dave Min's interesting. He's as a state senator, Min, before his election, I remember him making one statement after October 7th, in support of Israel, and it took him and he was silent on Gaza, and it took him until May 2025 to sign a letter or do anything.
Mm.
Um, I In fact, I went to his office as a state senator, and his staff told me that, well, that was a statement he made through the Asian caucus, and we don't get involved in federal issues. That was an excuse that they gave us.
Mm,
Then during the UC Irvine protests, he made a statement applauding UCI police and how they handled the student protests.
mm,
And since then, he has done nothing, um, at least from my knowledge and my conversations with the student activists. He has done nothing to support the students and the faculty that have been attacked in his district. Recently, he made a video speaking in support of ending the famine in Gaza back in July. But that was done hours before a planned protest outside of his office. And that was the only thing that kind of moved him. He saw folks are going
mm,
to come and protest outside of his office. So he made a video about that.
mm.
Yet he has, again, he has not co-sponsored, just like Tran, he's not co-sponsored the Blocks of Bombs bill. So his record shows minimal engagement on Gaza. He's largely been staying silent and avoiding. And it's interesting because when he was running,
Mm,
in this election, um, you know, let's be honest. They're afraid of the pro-Israel lobbyists. They're specifically afraid of AIPAC, and it came up in conversations. But it's interesting that Dave Min, when he was running in the primaries, or in the last election, um, AIPAC funded his opponent, and he beat her.
yeah, Joanna Weiss. Yes, yeah, she was.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember this. Mm,
Exactly.
mm,
Exactly. So I think
mm.
it's important. Both of them will have a bluer bluer
Yeah.
districts if Prop 50 passes. So I want to stay hopeful that if
Hmm.
we keep engaging them, they'll do the right thing. But it's really important that we keep the pressure on them and keep the
Yeah.
conversations.
Uh, yeah. No, thank you for sharing. That's a lot. I'll swing it over to Tracy. We'll circle back to this because it's a long conversation. Tracy,
Yes.
can you share some of the things we've seen from our Congress members on immigration from our work?
Yeah, sorry to go out of turn, Tim, but actually, I think it'd be really helpful to hear, if that's okay,
Oh,
Logan,
sure.
the congressional report card that you all were just recently released. And then I can share a lot more context behind some of the decisions that these Congress members have made, especially Derek Tran.
Yeah, sure. And I'll drop a link to the chat in a second, for anybody that would like to dig deeper in their own time. But so we've been looking at the votes of a number of OC's congressional delegation members over the last year, um, or since Trump took office. Specifically the Democratic members, because in the case of Young Kim, while there may be a tiny little bit of wiggle room on the margins, it's really not. That's not a super actionable vote when we're trying to think about how to apply activist resources and energy. Um, so let's look at a couple of them here. Let's start with actually Lou Correa, right? So right now he's in CA 46. Among the ones that we looked at, he's been a stronger vote on the topic of immigrant rights and due process, but not perfect. It's unclear at this time how much of that is ideological, or hesitance on his end, because he had some health issues that caused him to miss a couple key immigration votes in the past year, namely HR 2056, which was the legislation that repealed DC's right to establish itself as a sanctuary city, and 884, which overturned non-citizen voting in DC. Something very relevant, I think, to OC residents, given efforts here to establish local levels not for non-citizen voting. But he was a solid vote against the Violence Against Women Act, which sounded great on paper until you read the amendments that the Republican Party did to it. He opposed the Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. Again, something that sounds good for 2 seconds until you read what it does. And he opposed, most importantly, HR 29, the Lake and Riley Act, the draconian indefinite detention and deportation bill passed as a top of the list item by the Trump regime earlier this year. All in all, and I'll get later into what the new maps might mean for these members, because I don't want to take up too much time in this response. But all in all, he's been a stronger vote. Looking at Linda Sanchez, probably the most reliable among the OC Democrats. She's voted against every single significant piece of anti-immigrant legislation to come through Congress in terms of, like, again, Lake and Riley, VAWA, the DC bills. Her district will change. And I'm going to make a special note of that right now. Her district is one of the districts that will pick up some conservative voters. And so to ensure that she continues to be a stronger ally for OC communities, she'll need attention, if Prop 50 passes. In terms of Dave Min, this has been a hard one for us, because Dave Min sits in a fairly safe district as far as swing districts go. It's not true blue, but when you look at the breakdown, he has less of an excuse. Not that there's any excuse, but less of an excuse than some of his peers have for how he's voted. He supported the Lake and Riley Act. He supported HR 35, and he voted to overturn DC's right to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. Remember, DC has no representation in Congress. And that's the one thing they've ever asked the federal government for and still never received it. So to us, that kind of represents a betrayal of the families that helped Dave Min get elected. He's going to get a safer district, and that's going to require more attention. Mike Levin, another one who we're going to see his district grow safer, not as significantly as some of the others, but he, much like Dave Min, voted for a mix of this MAGA legislation. Especially one of his first votes when he was sworn into this term was for Lake and Riley. And that has devastating implications for OC families coming from an elected official who ran on the premise of defending us, right? We can look at Derek Tran as well, again, one of our problem legislators on this front. In CA 45, Tran ran on the premise of defending, on his background as an immigrant, and broke ranks with immigrant families by supporting Lake and Riley. First and foremost, again, this is something many of these members did as their first act this term in office, was vote for an indefinite detention and deportation bill. All of those members are getting safer districts, and I'll speak more to that later. But all of those members are getting safer districts, and what we're seeing in OC actually is a lot of those conservative voters are being shunted into Young Kim's district, which will make that a significantly less competitive district in exchange for solidifying a number of contested districts right now.
Thank you for that, Logan. So much legislation. We're really excited to hear more about this report card. So please share all that with us, and we'll make sure everyone here gets it. Thank you for bringing up the Lincoln Riley Act. Obviously, that was a key piece of legislation, had a lot of impact on immigrant rights. Tracy, can you share more about what that act was and why was it so damaging for Derek Tran to vote for that?
Yeah, so I think some of you may know that Derek Tran is the first Vietnamese person to represent Little Saigon in Congress, the first ever. He's not the first Vietnamese Congress member, but he was the first. And Derek Tran won office at a time when Little Saigon politics are significantly changing for the better. So for decades, we've had elected officials represent people all across Central OC who look like us, who are Vietnamese, who run off the Vietnamese identity, the Vietnamese refugee story. But things have gone progressively worse for most working class families and immigrants in Orange County. So just because we have representation in office that looks like us, that clearly has not shown up in terms of legislation or anything that has really made our lives better on a day-to-day basis. So Derek Tran ran during a time when there was a lot of potential for him to do much more. In Little Saigon, specifically Santa Ana, we had a Vietnamese council member champion rent control, an issue that Vietnamese community members really deeply care about and have been fighting for many years. We've had Vietnamese elected officials for the first time ever really take a stand on immigrant justice. And many of them joined us in some of the rallies that we held, fighting the deportation, the increased deportation of Vietnamese immigrants, as well as the fight to end ICE transfers of people who completed their prisoner jail sentences, but were, instead of being free, were sent to ICE. That was the backdrop that of Little Saigon during the time when he decided to run. And he presented himself as a candidate that would be on the side of, working class immigrant families, the way he spoke, the way he showed up, the people that he got endorsements from. But like Logan mentioned, as soon as he got into office, the first piece of legislation he voted on was the Lake and Riley Act, and he voted for it. And so over time, we've heard other Congress members on TV share that knowing what they know now about the Trump administration and truly what the Laken-Riley Act has done in terms of massively expanding immigration enforcement, they regret their vote. And if they could go back, they would not vote again. They would not vote yes on that. During the same town hall, I think it was CBS, something like that, one of those. Derek Tran had the opportunity to showcase, that he learned similarly to how his colleague did, but he used the opportunity to actually double down on his support for the Laken-Riley Act. So we followed up. A few of us went to a town hall. There was a series of town halls that he was hosting, mostly in North OC. We attended the one he held in, I believe it was Buena Park. At that same town hall, he mostly focused on how he was going to fight Trump, how he was going to defeat Trumpism, how he was going to stand up to his bullying Congress or, in the federal government. And when he was asked by an audience member about the Laken-Riley Act, he once again doubled down and said, I support the Laken-Riley Act. I believe it has due process, when clearly it doesn't. So we went up to him and we said, this is actually really not the case. People who are even accused of committing a crime can be indefinitely detained because of the Laken-Riley Act now. And so he didn't want to hear it. And that was like one of the first major, obviously, like extreme red flags for a Congress member because he clearly didn't read the bill. And he quadrupled down on a bill that he clearly did not read because he did not understand that it took away due process for immigrants. And so shortly after that, he joined Luke Correa in voting against ending the ability for non-citizens to vote in DC. When we told his office that the deportation of Vietnamese immigrants were increasing at rates like higher than ever before. His office said they had just heard about that and just learned about it until we got one of our community members shared her story on TV during a segment, and his office reached out to VietRISE asking to connect with her because they wanted to help. Unfortunately, they didn't do much at all. They pointed her to resources that she had already found herself. And the resource was simply just, can you help me get a passport for my 1-year-old daughter when my husband gets deported? And from there on, in the beginning, VietRISE tried very hard to inform him about what's going on. We went to where he was at to try to meet with him. We had a meeting scheduled with him, but he ultimately chose to ignore what's happening to our communities. And the last straw for us when we finally decided to protest him was when he signed into a legislation that was thinking ICE. And this was at the height of the ICE raids that took place in Orange County and LA. And he never apologized for it. So as someone who campaigned on a really powerful, Vietnamese refugee story that talked about the sacrifices his parents went through to connect with his voters, to connect with other immigrant communities that he primarily serves, now that he's in office, now that he's the power to finally do something about it, he has done the complete opposite and voted for legislation that will gravely harm immigrant communities for many decades to come. And so one of the major, I'll close with like one of the major justifications that he and his office have provided was that they live in a purple district. They represent a purple district. For those who don't know, a purple district is one that's like in between red and blue. So it can go either or. And that's an excuse, that is often used by Democrats specifically. I've never heard a Republican say we have a purple district, so I can't vote for, this Republican agenda. I only ever hear Democrats say that. So if Prop 50 passes and the 45th district becomes a much more democratically safe district, will he change his votes suddenly? Will Derek Tran suddenly become a champion for immigrant rights? A champion calling for the end of the genocide in Gaza? A champion for women's rights, and put his money where his mouth is. We don't know, and I guess we'll see. But as an organization that works primarily working class Vietnamese people, we have closely tracked how Derek Tran has been voting.
Thank you for sharing, Tracy. Being part of this work and seeing the accountability on our elected officials is so important. And your last point is a great, transition to this broader question. Now, Derek Tran is obviously, like other Democrats across California, if Prop 50 passes, will be in safer districts, and who knows if they'll find their courage, right? I want to specifically ask on this question because while it's creating safer seats for purple district Democrats, it's also creating more conservative districts for current Democrats in blue strongholds like Los Angeles. Um, so, and this is for, I think, Logan, I want to start you off on this. How do you see this affecting the governing priorities of Democrats like Lou Correa and Linda Sanchez, who are incumbent Democrats who've been there for years and haven't really been tested? Do you think that they would govern differently with a different district?
Yeah, so it's challenging because we can, again, I think like Tracy mentioned earlier, look at when Democrats held, the White House and the Senate and Congress, and didn't move boldly to enact basic protections that most people agree on, right? To defend against deportation overreaches or really almost any other policy front. At the same time, it creates better conditions for us to fight for those conditions, right? Or for those outcomes, right? So frontliners in traditionally contested districts, like some of the people we've discussed, will get longer runways with more breathing room, where they will not have as competitive reelection campaigns. They will be much safer in their seats, and they will have more Democratic voters in their districts. Um, and it would be reasonable to see that turn into less defensive voting on their parts and more proactive voting, especially going into a presidential, going from this reelection into a presidential year where the party is going to be hoping to score headlines. And it, they do love scoring headlines, but I think what's going to translate to success for them are those headlines translating into real outcomes? Um, History leaves that in question. Um, like you mentioned, some safer seat Democrats are going to see more conservative voters show up in their districts. Um, Paul Mitchell did make an effort, like I mentioned, to shunt a lot of those red voters into red districts already, to minimize the impact on existing vulnerable or recently vulnerable Democratic seats. Um, in those districts, you'll probably see those people talk a little bit less about standing up for civil rights, because that's what we've seen happen. And they'll probably talk a little more about budgets and fiscal prudence and, decorum, because that seems to be the playbook of a lot of these somewhat safe Democrats right now who are still trying to pick up the mythical moderate swing voter, or members like Correa, right, who have Homeland Security in their docket. Um, Caucus management will matter, and I don't know how that's going to play out. With somebody like Hakeem Jeffries running the party, he has not yet demonstrated a big backbone or a strong willingness to really stand up and defend basic constitutional rights or due process. Um, it's required a lot of push to get him to move when he does. And that's unfortunate because he's somebody who would have the ability to lean on these members here in Southern California, here in Orange County, and remind them that, hey, you just got a safer district. You don't have to vote for that MAGA deportation bill. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Rashad, would you like to take a crack at this? How do you think this affects Lou Correa's district? Anaheim, I think, is in your backyard. On the issues you're caring most about, do you project growth on this issue?
It's going to be interesting to see how Lou Correa in District 46 uh, will respond to the change. I mean, he will still have a huge advantage. It's still a solid Democratic district, even though it's going to be less Democratic than it was.
Yeah.
But I don't see him, uh, adopting more progressive positions, particularly on Palestinian human rights. Like he's in a safe district. We know that he's probably going to win again and again until he has a very serious primary challenger. And we haven't seen that until now, unfortunately. Um, it's I mean, while the seat remains safe, it makes it even more crucial for the community to hold them accountable on Gaza and civil rights. Um, but I've had a long history with uh, in the interactions with Luke Correa specifically because I was a constituent for a long time, and since he was elected in 2016 as a member of Congress, um, and it's always been disappointing to say the least. I remember 2019, Luke Correa is doing a tour. I mean, the way he talks to us, the way he talks to Arab Americans and Palestinians, it's dehumanizing. Maybe he doesn't get that, but it's very dehumanizing. In 2019, he's doing a tour of businesses, and he stops by two little Arabia businesses. One of them is a Palestinian-owned dessert shop, and he's meeting with probably around 15, 20 folks in the dessert shop, and somebody asks him what his position is about on the occupation of Palestine, and he starts his answer with. Um, eh, in order to keep to keep the peace in the Middle East, we need to support a strong Israel. That's how he starts his answer to a bunch of Palestinian constituents. It's very dehumanizing. It's like going to, a bunch of, I don't know, a Ukrainian community and telling them to keep the peace in Ukraine, we need to support Russia, or talking to Latinx communities and telling them, to keep you all safe, we need stronger ICE. It's very dehumanizing, and his voting record have been horrible. Just in the past couple of years, he voted over and over again to increase military aid to Israel during the genocide. Met with him uh, in late 2023 to ask him to co-sponsor the ceasefire resolution. He said he's going to study it, and that seems to be his answer to everything.
Do we lose Rashad there? Is he, anyone else see this?
Frozen, frozen and carbonite.
Okay.
Maybe Luke Correa is listening. I'm just kidding.
I don't know.
Wow.
Eh,
The power, right? I think Logan, would you like I think we're good, right? Rashad, are you there? Sorry, we had some technical issues there. Rashad, are you good? Can you hear us?
uh, can you all hear me?
Yeah, yeah, good now.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I
Yeah, no,
can
the
hear you.
censorship is
Can you hear
real.
me?
Yeah, it's definitely
All
our side.
right. Yeah, maybe Lou was listening to. So,
Mm,
uh,
yeah.
and one other thing, like during the genocide, um, he made a statement condemning the chant from the river to the sea. He refused to co-sponsor until now the Block the Bombs bill as well. I mean, it's a bill that has garnered what 55 plus Democrats have already co-sponsored it, including his other members of Congress in the surrounding counties like Judy Chu, Mark Takano, and more recently Robert Garcia. And he hasn't. So it's unfortunate to see that, and I don't uh, I don't see that changing. Um, so our best bet is you know hopefully in the future somebody more progressive run in that district.
Yeah. This is a good segue to our second to last question. I want to bring it back to redistricting specifically, with the new proposed changes to Prop 50. I know it's been really important for our organizing work over the past few years to make sure that our communities, our neighborhoods are kept together. So for yourselves, what are you most concerned about when it comes to district lines being changed? And if ethnic enclaves have been kept intact in past cycles, um, how is this translated to political progress or representation for our communities? Um, I want to start with Tracy on this question, if possible.
Mhm. So, um, where we where VietRISE is and where the population of the Vietnamese community is Little Saigon. This is the first and oldest Little Saigon, the largest Little Saigon. Little Saigon here in Orange County is like known to be like the center of the Vietnamese diaspora. And so, Vietnamese politicians and groups have built political power. Oh no, we lost Rashad. I'll just continue until he comes back. But again, like if you listen to me ever rant or talk about Little Saigon politics, you will hear me say that Vietnamese politicians have gained so much political power, but only really for themselves. And so we've had, the ethnic enclave of Little Saigon has been strong and has been at least politically united for many decades now, but not for the majority of the people. Um, and so VRI set out to kind of change that, or at least to make sure that these new maps that when we were working as part of the redistricting process in 2021 reflected the needs of working class people. And we spent a lot of time. We created community redistricting commissions in Santa Ana and Westminster, in Garden Grove. In Westminster, we were able to propose a 5 district map. Unfortunately, that didn't pass when it went to the voters. And then in Garden Grove, they actually tried to forgo the entire redistricting process, saying that the map that one of the council members created back in 2016 was fine, so we didn't need to do anything else until the ACLU came and supported us in pushing the city council to do more. So, our ethnic enclave has been around for a while now. We fought, um, people obviously fought to have Little Saigon recognized because when in the 70s and the 80s, we had very racist council members try to push out Vietnamese immigrants that had just came here from Vietnam after the war. And so I don't want to discount that fight or how much organizing went into finally getting recognition for Vietnamese people and for Vietnamese people in the diaspora building a home here now that after not being able to return to their countries or their homeland. Um, so in places like Santa Ana, we have seen, redistricting or the redrawing of wards actually truly benefit our community, not just benefit Vietnamese people, but benefit immigrants. So I mentioned earlier, we have a council member in Santa Ana who championed rent control, albeit she ran on a platform against rent control, but we were able to out-organize her belief system by bringing her directly to the people that she represents, largely Vietnamese seniors, as well as Latino working class mothers, and she heard directly what rent control would do. And she ended up becoming a true champion for it and has been for many years now. So that's one really good example of what happens when representation is more than just someone who looks like you, but someone who's like truly listening and um, building, creating policy, passing policy that actually reflects our needs. When it comes to the 45th district, when you showed the map earlier, you pointed out that a chunk of West Santa Ana is now given to Derek Trans District, which in my opinion makes absolutely no sense. Fun fact, I actually live in West Santa Ana and it's cut exactly right where I live.
You think they did it on purpose,
So
Tracy?
I don't know, I don't know if Lou
Yeah,
Correa was watching, that's why Rashad isn't
yeah,
here anymore, or if they knew that I lived there and that's how they wrote the map. But
yeah.
yeah, so that's really what has changed or hasn't changed.
Mm,
And I don't know why they cut out. If they really wanted all of Vietnamese, Little Saigon together, why did they cut out half of the
yeah,
ward?
it's a very strange word. Yeah,
That's all for rent control. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know that this redistricting work was very impactful. Like getting, we have a Santa Ana City Council member, a Vietnamese council member who was a decisive vote on rent control, which was helpful. Logan, I don't know if your organization has done redistricting work, but what have you seen across the board in terms of keeping communities together? How are you thinking about like identity politics right now with all the maps being redrawn?
Yeah, the specific in terms, so like the at a precinct level, it's data I work with a little bit less, because I'm looking at oftentimes like electoral outcomes in terms of what's going to shift, hopefully shift, or move policy. But I think especially like talking about like West Santa Ana, right? Are there, I actually had a question if I can maybe reframe my response is like for Tracy is assuming these maps go into effect, as somebody who's on the ground, right, in the area doing the organizing work, do you see or are you thinking about contingencies for communities that may now have radically different congressional representation?
Contingencies as in, or when it comes to,
How you're gonna respond or address that? I know that was not a planned question, but it was stuck in my mind listening to you talk about. Um,
I'm sorry, Logan, do you mind repeating the question actually?
just like, are there specific here's an like so for example, if we get new districts, right? Do you see their value being value in, for example, like pushing for district offices to be established in communities newly roped into a district, so that they are able to more directly be represented by a member who otherwise had really no engagement or presence right in that community?
I'm, I'm not sure. I think that's a really good question. Um, I guess I will say that the thing is, when it comes to Vietnamese people who especially are monolingual or mostly only really speak Vietnamese, of course, people will naturally only really want to talk to representatives that can speak their language. So you're gonna have like half of West Santa Ana who are largely Vietnamese who fought for rent control, who have been clearly advocates and fighting for rent control for many years. They can't go to their Congress member because, well, I think right now the Congress member is Lucuria. They still can't go to Derek Tran technically, except half of us can, to ask for him to fight for rent control or fight for more protections for mobile home residents who are seniors that are being, you know, priced down, pushed out of their homes. So um, I think in that area of Santa Ana specifically, I'm glad that we still have a council member that does actually listen to her constituents, specifically her Vietnamese constituents. She could do a lot better though on other issues beyond rent control, but well, I hope that answered your question.
No, it actually it has me thinking now. When I get off here, I want to go look up and see Tim's map and look at where population change, like population shifts in new districts are going to impact potentially just like language services for members that didn't necessarily accommodate or have the same level of demand to accommodate those. As somebody like who is in a government service position, like it's something that every one of those offices grapples with. And it will be interesting to see if that's a consideration they've made at all.
Welcome back, Rashad.
Yeah.
I'm glad Lucre couldn't hold you back that long. I'm sorry, I need to stop making that joke, but welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rashad, too. We will move on to the question. Just wanted to give you a chance to answer this one. In terms of the redistricting process, how is keeping ethnic enclaves, um, if they were able to, translate to political progress or representation for your community, especially in, the areas you're working in.
For Arab American communities, I think the districts remained intact and largely unaffected by the changes. So the shifts we're seeing in the district won't affect like Little Arabia, for example, in the 46th district. So we see uh, mostly Arab communities in those areas are still in that district. Not that it translated to much influence when it comes to Korea specifically. We have wins in other state and city levels. Um, and for 40 District 47, and there's a large Arab and Middle Eastern communities, and I think there's still it remained intact overall. So I don't think the changes have affected in terms of uh, neighborhoods where Arab Americans are concentrated in.
I want to move on to our final question, so we can have some chances for the audience to ask their questions and have a chat. And this is for all of you. In terms of like the actual campaign for Prop 50, what is the messaging you're seeing from both parties, from both sides, opponents and supporters? what's been on your airwaves, what's been on your mailers, what's been on your ads, and do you think that actually reflects the concerns of people today?
I guess I can get started. So this has been a gripe I've had with the Prop 50 campaign for pretty much since it launched, and it's only increased since, you know, election day grows closer. So to contrast it, Tim, you showed a quote earlier of that Republican senator from Texas who said, we're not lying to you. We're not trying to fool you. This is what we're doing. This is partisan. And at the very least, I can respect that because it's honest. They're not trying to fool us. They know exactly what they're doing. They're telling us exactly what they've done to change the congressional districts in Texas. But when it comes to California, if you go to the Prop 50 website, it promises so many things that it makes it seem as if voting for Prop 50 would change your entire life. Voting for Prop 50 will lead to the revolution. Voting for Prop 50 will help stop fascism, which is not something I'm saying, but it's something like I'm making up. I've literally seen it in email blasts. I see it on social media posts. All I need to do is just be honest. And I think this is why so many people, firstly, for many other reasons, of course, but another reason why people are becoming way more disillusioned and distrustful of the Democratic Party is for failing to be honest and for over promising things they know they can't actually do because they think that saying the right thing will win our vote. So I think the last straw for me was seeing that it will help end fascism, which was very frustrating because, how is winning 5 more seats for Democrats actually going to change our lives or stop fascism or hold the government accountable? Because earlier I talked about how when we had a majority, Democratic majority in the White House and Congress, they didn't do anything with it. They didn't do anything about Roe v. Wade. They didn't codify it when they could have. They didn't pass immigrant rights legislation when they could have. So what are really like most regular everyday people gain from this? Nothing.
Mm.
But at the very least, what they can do is not lie about it. There's no need to make things up. The most honest ad I've seen so far came from Tom Steyer. I don't know if everyone here recognizes that name, but this is a billionaire that spent a ton of his own money trying to become the president. And for some reason, I only remember him for his shoes. There was like a whole skit, I think, or I don't know, Democratic debate. Um, and he said in his ad, this is what it's going to do. This is just a response to what Texas is doing, and it's just going to create 5 more Democratic seats. And I can respect that. It feels like all these other promises that people are making, the campaign is making, groups supporting Prop 50 are making, it is patronizing because it kind of makes it seem like we can't look deeper,
Mhm.
beyond these weird promises that you're making. And so, those are some of the things I've seen, and I will forever make fun of Prop 50 messaging.
Yeah,
Um,
I love it. Keep
but
sending me mailers. Yeah, no, and I'm happy you mentioned that because I think for myself, I working in civic engagement, being honest with people is the first step to getting them involved. And if you can't be honest with people, how do we convince them to volunteer, to give public comment, to get involved in the campaigns? It's just not a good way of building trust with people we're, depending on. Rashad, what have you seen in terms of the messaging on Prop 50? Anything specific that's resonating or not resonating?
Nothing is necessarily resonating other than, this is a response to what's happening in Texas, and Democrats want 5 more seats. And I agree
Hmm.
with uh, Tracy's assessment, and it just feels like Democrats are not learning the lesson that they need to listen to constituents, and their policies need to reflect what people want instead of over promising, and instead of you know the campaigns are based around scaring everyone from uh, the worst party, or Trump, or if you don't vote Democrat, then you're gonna get Trump.
Hmm.
Um, I, I know voters would appreciate honesty more, and would
Hmm.
appreciate elected officials that listen to them and to their concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Logan, want to say anything about the campaigns? Anything you've seen on the data, the campaign finances, messaging? I know you're into that, so
Yeah, I on the yes on 50 side, I I I think too it can't be understated the impact of Gavin Newsom on the current numbers the campaign is doing, and the money that it's bringing in. Um, and that we should consider that that doesn't just reflect donors or voters in California, right? There's money coming in from out of state. There's a lot of it because Governor Newsom has recently enjoyed a bit of a social media moment by paying somebody to go on Twitter and be more clever than he usually is. Um, but it's worked for him. Like at the end of the day, it's worked for him. Additionally, California voters mostly like him. He defeated a recall, and when he gets behind something, that's usually reflected somewhat in voter sentiment. And I think that in spite of tone deaf messaging, that has helped buoy the Yes campaign. Um, I want to comment briefly, actually, because we talked about how some of the yes messaging has a dishonest framing. I also want to talk about, and agreeing with that, some of the just absolutely wild stuff we've seen come out of the no campaign. Um, like some truly bonkers pieces of literature. I saw one the other day. I don't remember which three cities it was targeted at. They were somewhere in Southern California. Um, it wasn't OC. It was in Simi Valley, I believe, which is another mixed kind of red and blue area, more red than blue. And it was alleging that like the city of Simi Valley would become part of the city of San Fernando, which are like radically different. They were just outright lying, saying it would redraw city boundaries. Um, and we've seen a lot of messaging like that. We've also seen a lot of their going back to the way that Newsom, I think, has buoyed the Yes campaign. We've seen a lot of the No campaign targeting Newsom and the propositions association with Newsom, and I think that's blown up in their faces, as evidenced by the fact that polling shows it's very likely to pass. If you conducted the election tomorrow, it would be 70 to 20 to whatever. Um, I think that was just a wild misread by the opposition campaign, and that it has allowed the Yes campaign to ride that in spite of maybe mistakes or missteps in how they're framing what will actually be achieved by this proposition.
yeah, yeah. And for more context, I've also read reports that the fundraising on the No campaign is basically stopped. It seems like California Republicans and national Republicans are basically throwing in the towel, prioritizing redistricting fights in other states. Even Gavin Newsom has told his supporters, like, "Hey, stop giving me money. Like, let's go do other things." And for me, the lasting lesson I want to make sure we're aligned on is like win or lose Prop 50. Obviously, the Democratic Party still has a long way to go into convincing our voters what does control of the House look like in 26. The minute Prop 50 ends, they still have to continue their messaging and their campaigns to make that worth something. In a way, and like going back to Tracy's point about Tom Steyer's ad, like when Republicans against Prop 50 were like, this is a sacramental power grab. I'm like, kind of, yeah, I want that. Like, please, like, power is not something to be afraid of. It's something to be harnessed and to be used for justice and for equity. And in that way, I was like, yeah, please give us more of that. Yeah. But to kind of close out the panel discussion, I want to thank you all for your questions. Now, we were going to do a breakout, but I think with this amount of people, we want to kind of open up the room for everyone here to kind of, share their thoughts as well. Happy to, raise your hand and I'll call on you if you want to just ask a quick question. Some of the things I'm thinking about, to kind of start the conversation for people in the room, like how are your Congress members governing right now? What is important in the messaging? How is this messaging influencing your decision to vote? We encourage people to obviously ask questions through the chat or raise your hands if you would like to speak. We'll happily call on you. Um, so, um, oh, it's a little off topic, but figured give it a chance. Is it true any of us have heard rumors Gavin Newsom has acquired a $40 million mansion? Tracy, you get that invite? Have you gotten invited to hang out at Gavin Newsom's $40 million
No, can you
mansion?
believe it? Gosh,
Uh,
maybe you didn't get it yet. That's why I haven't gotten it.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay, I have no
honestly,
idea. Never heard of
um,
this before.
I definitely want to hear about the housing prices and how we can get more of that addressed. But that sounds like a good question to to investigate. Um, yeah.
Um, I guess if I can just kind of round out some of my comments, at least things I wanted to share, was that there's so much money being poured into this election, and everyday voters are being told so many things, being promised so many things, being told that so many of their problems would be fixed by voting yes on Prop 50. Um, and I'm not telling you not to vote on this, of course. Like, we want people to go out and vote. We want people to know how to vote. We want people to be educated and very informed on what they're voting on. Um, but the Democrats right now are asking a lot of the community and promising these things to us. And they need to return. If you're going to ask us to vote yes on Prop 50, if you're going to throw it into our faces that, um, saying that we need this, otherwise Trump is going to take over everything, even though he already has, then Democrats need to do much more. So you've heard so much already from all of us about how they have not been showing up, how they voted against all the interests of the immigrant communities, those that believe in a free Palestine or want a free Palestine, those fighting, against ICE for immigrant rights. So that's mainly the reason why we wanted to host this webinar to talk more about where it was coming from, what
Mhm.
Prop 50 is, but now what we need to see moving forward from these Democrats. They're asking so much of us.
Mhm. No, thank you for that.
That,
And yeah, go ahead, Logan. Yeah, please.
I was going to say that kind of I think echoes where I'm feeling, and I know what we've talked about at Harvard, right? And it's important to be clear that like what Prop 50 is, right? Is it's a temporary congressional only redraw meant to neutralize extreme maps in Texas, and that's ultimately all of what it does. Um, and if we pass that, right, and we pass that and we implement these new maps, and it just means that Dave Mann or Derek Tran are now unbeatable and can continue to vote for things like the Lake and Riley Act. What was the point? Um, so, like, if they are going to talk about these grand plans or what this proposition would do, like, I want to hear like what does that mean for these OC members? Like, what will they be doing? And I want to hear commitments that they can be held to account for if they don't follow through. Um, so that when they come back to voters, like the Democratic Party did in the last election, and said, "Vote for us to stop Donald Trump," and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump's legislation, or turned around, continued to supply a functionally unlimited amount of 500-pound bombs to the Israeli Air Force. Um, like people are going to continue to ask what was the point, and we're going to continue to see that disaffection or those shifts in voters. Um, to us, it's really simple. It's if OC Democrats end up with safer seats, and they're going to, is we have a really simple ask, and it's use that safety to protect due process and dignity and fight family separations and indefinite detention and block the kind of foreign policy that contributes directly to, widespread human rights violation, ongoing imperialism, and just egregious death, death of innocent people in Gaza and in the West Bank, and elsewhere in the world where we see that same policy, and deliver on the economic promise of the American dream for immigrant families in OC. And if you do those things, then we'll start to be good. But we need to see that first.
Yeah. For me, first personally, I want to just take some of my own privilege here, just like to share and echo a lot of what you all said. For me, I have not seen like any stated platform on how to claw back the nearly $200 billion of increased funding for ICE and Border Patrol and all the increased enforcement that's happening. What's happening on our streets is so visible and heartbreaking. And I've not yet seen anyone tell me how they're going to hold people accountable if they are back in office. Um, and just, we're watching food stamps and food banks going to be very precarious situation next week. And healthcare obviously is a huge issue for lots of Americans. But when it comes to civil liberties and, holding ICE accountable, just a few bullet points on what Speaker Jeffries would do with that gavel. Um, you know, they're not even campaigning on it, and that's just kind of why it makes me feel very disillusioned. But I also know that, like, in terms of the broader organizing work between these spaces and other spaces, we hope that the people listening and watching continue to take some of these ideas. If you are somehow in spaces proximate to the Democratic Party and their corners, make sure that they understand the frustration and the pain. And the streets have reflected this for the entire summer. And so it is a missed opportunity by so many politicians in our orbits if they are not realizing the gravity of the situation. I want to leave room for some closing statements from our awesome panelists. Thank you all for coming. One last thing to share before we all kind of take off for the evening. I know for those who are obviously interested in voting, you should all have received your mail-in ballot by now from Orange County. If you're in Orange County, the Secretary of State's website has a "Where's My Ballot" tracker that you could go to kind of see where your ballot is. We want to remind people to send in their ballots early. The Postal Service is not reliable this year because of the shutdown, and so people are being asked to make sure their postmarks even sooner than Election Day. Polling places, voting center locations are already open in Orange County. You could check out ocvote.gov to kind of see the closest vote center, the hours for those centers, and the easiest way to drop off your ballots. That's what I personally like to do. Um, so whatever not, your feelings around the politics, we obviously know that voting is one way people know that the Arab community, the Vietnamese community are voting in scale, and they need to be prioritizing our voices. So with that, we'll, have some closing words. Rashad, you want to take us home? We'll go one by one.
Yeah, I think it's time for our representatives to listen to the constituents. Uh, they're still failing to reflect their constituents' opinions. So it's going to be up to us as a community um, to organize, raise our voices. We cannot let them get away with it, just because they're our local democratic officials are going to be in bluer and more safe districts. We cannot let them get away with it. Uh, we got to do better. We got to demand more action. Expect more from our representatives. Um, and one disappointment is also Democratic Party leadership on a local level. It just feels like OC Democrats, enable this and they want this and they continue this. So um, uh, we've got to hold them all accountable, but it's going to happen through our sustained pressure on um, these representatives to reflect the values and the priorities that we discussed today. Um, we're seeing what's happening in New York, and it just feels like over there, um, uh, people are making their voices heard, and the top candidate uh, seems to be the one who um, uh, is listening to what voters want and what working class folks are asking for. So we need to learn that lesson and do better here in Orange County.
Thank you so much, Rashad. Logan, any last words from the Harbor Institute? And make sure you tell us about your event so we know how to access it.
Yeah, I would love to drop a link, but we don't actually have a chat box. So Tim, I'm gonna bug you after the
Yeah,
fact. So if you do
I'll
like a
email it.
follow-up email,
Hmm.
I'll make sure you have that link. We're gonna be hosting a a little shorter than this one webinar next week on the 5th, to talk in more detail about the votes of the OC congressional delegation, the impact those votes have had on the community, and then kind of a roadmap for action to hold them accountable, and maybe try to steer them back toward some specific actions that they could take, especially if these new maps pass, which will, um, take some of the wind out of the sails they use to say, well, I had to vote that way. Um, Tim, I'll get you that, and we hope to see anybody who is more interested in digging into the details of that and how you can hold your members accountable there.
Thank you so much for your time and energy, Logan. We appreciate all the policy knowledge and legislation you brought today. And we'll close it with our Executive Director, Tracy Law.
Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us, joining us on a Wednesday night. What I'll say are two things. The first one is I truly believe we're at a time now where the working class, the regular voter, deserves more than just two options, more than just two parties. Um, and with Prop 50, in the grand scheme of things, with the way that everyday life is getting more expensive, things are getting progressively, harder and challenging to um, navigate, as ICE immigration enforcement ramps up and its budget beefed up. Um, Prop 50 are just crumbs in response as a solution. And we deserve way more than that. And the people deserve and can and should ask for way more than that from our representatives. And the way to get that is through organizing. Organizing is not an abstract concept, but it's not, it's not something you can just start doing. Um, I think we've gotten to a point where we'll say just organize. It's time to get involved in community organizing, but you really do have to find a group that you really trust. You have to build genuine relationships. Organizing is for the long term, which means that people are not going to be perfect. Um, but if you find people who, believe in your vision for a better world and you're willing to get out there, on the ground, you don't even have to like be out there protest. You can, do what Logan does, which is policy and research, which we deeply need. We need evidence-backed demands when we're lobbying or we're calling on our government to do more. So that's what we need to see. And we're nearing the end of the year, but I invite you to come to some of VietRISE's events if you'd like. This Saturday, we're hosting a Get Out the Vote canvas led by Tim. If you want to come talk to Garden Grove neighbors about immigration, about Prop 50, and then ask for their stance on rat control, if that's something that they would like to see. So thank you so much again for joining. Go vote, please. But we deserve more than this, and we can ask for more. We should ask for more from our representatives.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. In terms of next steps, I'll be sending up an email with Logan's event. I'll have the slides and make sure that my little map is accessible for you all to play around with and see how that affects your individual districts. But then once again, I want to thank you all to all the panelists for your time and energy and your commitment to this work, and to all our participants in the question and answers. We hope you learned something today, and we'll make sure that we share this recording to any of your friends or families who may have questions about any of this. With that, we'll close it out for tonight. Thank you again for all of your energy and all your presence. We wish you a very safe end to your month. Happy Halloween. Take care. Bye.
Thanks.